Episode 185 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of the Interpretation Station, the show where yours truly does all the hard work for you and finds out all the names of those pesky government agencies, government programs, strategies, policies, and puts them there out for you on a plate so that you don't have to. And we've got an excellent example of one such a text today. It's a real behemoth that I've got for you today. So we're not going to waste much time in the intro. I want to get started because look at the size of this thing. 13 pages long. Suka blat. Yeah, as I say, this is a behemoth, okay, and this is almost like a gospel, I tell you. So this is the introductory statement that we've got here by the Russian Federation at a meeting of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, okay, the CERD as it's known. Now this was from a few months ago, I think it was earlier this year, and I think it was me who actually did the introductory statement. Now why are these sort of statements so incredibly useful, okay? I will tell you why. Well, in many ways, they're very helpful. Okay, when you're assigned to one of these meetings, they're the first thing that comes up, and you almost always you always get the introductory statement, and it always it's a very good way of giving you a sort of foretaste of what's going to be discussed going on. These meetings, they tend to last. It tends to be 2 times 3 hours, so you've got 6 hours of full-on interpreting. Okay, and now these introductory statements, as I say, they give you, they're like a finger buffet, if you like. They touch on all the main topics that are going to be covered when you reach the main course, shall we say. For example, in this introductory statement here, it covers all sorts of things from indigenous issues, law enforcement, hate speech, corrections, all this kind of stuff. And as I say, it gives you a chance to just get familiar with the vocab, and you can find out, what are the sort of bits of jargon that they're going to be using later on. What are the kind of agencies that they're going to be referring to? And so, yeah, it's a very good way to get an initial idea, to give yourself a rough idea of the kind of big topics, because obviously later on you're not going to get these prepared statements. Okay, you don't get these later. I mean, because after that it becomes much more what's the word? Extraneous, extemporaneous. Okay, it's like Q&A question. The committee members ask the questions, and then you get all these answers, and sometimes from you have these interior ministry officials who speak very, especially like in countries, in Eastern European countries, the delivery, it can be very robotic, like very, very. It's as though you're just pressing a button and they just sort of spew out all this bureaucratic jargon. It's not like often with the English speakers, with native English speaker delegations, there tends to be a much more touchy-feely approach to things, whereas with delegations from Eastern Europe, and not just Eastern Europe but elsewhere, it tends to be when bureaucrats speak very bureaucratic language, as I say, almost like you're pressing a button and they just deliver all this very stilted, clunky jargon, and you'll see this very much in here. I wonder why. I mean, I don't know why that is. Is it because it seems to me anyway that in the Anglosphere, shall we say, the approach is much more touchy-feely? Is it because there's more an idea of the government and the people being one, the idea of we're all in it together? Whereas perhaps in Eastern Europe, I don't know, and other parts of the world, there is a distinct separation between the rulers, and the plebs down below, and they're just more comfortable having that separation. And perhaps the plebs even like it when the ones higher up, when the delivery is almost kind of impersonal, shall we say. Maybe it lends an added dimension of authority to what's being said. I don't know, I'm just speculating. Anyway, enough of my speculations. Let's actually get down to business. Let's see what the Russians had to say, and I'll share the screen with you. Now, like I said, this is a bit of a monster of a text. It's 13 pages long, so hopefully I can do it in one episode. I'll be moving through it very fast, okay? Hopefully I can do it in one episode. I have done something like this before, and it's worth perhaps watching that other episode maybe after this one. This was episode 124 that I did, and that was, I believe it was Kyrgyzstan, I do beg your pardon, Kyrgyzstan speaking that was their introductory statement at the Committee Against Torture, where again you had a lot of really good law enforcement torture vocabulary. So I'd very much recommend that you perhaps try watching that one as well. That's a really good one also to practice. Like, share, and subscribe before we go on any further. And let's get down to business. Let's see what the Russians had to say here. I'll be putting, of course, the transcript and the audio in the description box so that you can do it at your own leisure. As usual, I recommend giving that statement a try. Give the, play the audio, try interpreting it, record yourself, and then come and listen to me giving my commentary on the text. Okay, and I'll give you. I'll see if I can. I'll put a link to perhaps the report. Maybe I'll put a link to the report. Okay, that the Russians submitted. Then you can have a look through the report. Give yourself like 10 minutes maybe to look through the report. Try and get some of the vocab there, and then maybe give this a try. Or you can if you want to really replicate the conditions, then I think I had about 15 minutes to prepare this. I got the text ahead of time. Okay. So I had about 15 minutes to prepare it, so you could try doing it that way. It's up to you, okay? Now, so here we go. Выступление руководителя делегации Российской Федерации Барина в рамках рассмотрения Комитетом по ликвидации расовой дискриминации Объединенных 25-26 периодических докладов Российской Федерации о выполнении Международной конвенции о ликвидации всех форм расовой дискриминации. Okay, so this convention, okay, that the committee works to, it's called the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is also known by its acronym as the CERD. Okay, the CERD. So you'll be wanting to use that in that statement, because it's such a good shortcut. Okay, so let's get started. You also see some of the notes that I took at the time, and that can be quite an interesting insight into my own thought process. What little, for example, what phrases perhaps I was worried might give me difficulty, and so I, made notes. Anyway, so distinguished committee members, colleagues, в современном мире now. For long-time viewers of the interpretation station, you know that I like, from the современном мире, I like saying in this day and age, okay? In this day and age, in the contemporary world, if you will. The problem of недопущения любых форм, preventing all forms. I don't know if that might cause you a bit of confusion. Любых is usually we do any, but I guess because it's недопущение, you always недопущение любых, you don't недопущение всех. So anyway, preventing all forms of racial discrimination is becoming increasingly актуально, relevant, topical. Российская Федерация, okay, for the one and only time, maybe in this statement, just for the purposes of form, we're going to call them the Russian Federation. We'll give them the full name. After that, you shouldn't be using, I don't want to be hearing Federation anymore after that. Just call them Russia after that. The Russian Federation, высоко оценит, appreciates, greatly appreciates, welcomes, whatever, the role of the Committee on Combating All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Okay, and again, so here we'll call them give them their full name, the committee. It's the Committee on Eliminating противодействие, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. И ответственно подходит. Okay, I noted that takes seriously the issue of выполнение своих обязательств. I like to deliver on commitments. I'm sure you know that already. Of delivering on its international commitments under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Again, just for the purposes of form, we're going to give it the full name the first time around. Okay, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Учитывая важность, given, just say the given. Okay, given the importance of this topic. Russia has sforмирована делегация. I think it has brought a delegation. Okay, has brought a delegation, в состав которой, which includes, okay, в состав которой вошли, all those four words can just be synthesized into which includes representatives of key ministries and departments, осуществляющих реализацию. This is a bit of a tautology, it seems to me. Carrying out implementation. I mean, it's like one thing, isn't it? So, who are implementing, I think you can just synthesize that to one word, right? Implementing the provisions of the convention within their purview, в пределах своих компетенций. That written there for competencia, purview. That's a nice word for that. For, remit, purview, mandate. Anyway, I went for within their mandate. Specifically, now this is going to be the important one in this presentation, the Federal Agency on по делам национальности. Ethnic Affairs, I've written that in, you can maybe see it there faintly. The Federal Agency for Ethnic Affairs, Ministry of Sport, Ministry of Digital Development, Communications and Mass Communications. Actually, the full name of that ministry, I've just had to look it up. I thought I'd just do, like I said at the start, I do all the hard work for you. Right? This is the Ministry of Digital Development, Communications, связи, и массовых коммуникаций, mass media. Okay, that's the actual official English name of that ministry. Ministry of Labour and Social Protection, Ministry of Education, of Foreign Affairs, of Justice, Internal Affairs, or the Interior Ministry, and the General Prosecutor's Office. And that's, again, I looked that up to see exactly what the name, the English equivalent name was in Russian. They call it the General Prosecutor's Office. The provisions of the CERD, so now we're going to just use the acronym, okay, включены в правовую систему, are part of, I think the most straightforward way of doing that, are part of the Russian legal system and its practice of application, thus becoming, став таким образом, okay, so becoming an integral part, неотъемлемой частью, that's generally the sort of my go-to solution for that, an integral part of проводимой государством политики. I would just drop the проводимой, just don't worry about that. An integral part of the state's policy in such areas as combating extremism, you're going to be doing a lot of combating, okay, in this, counteracting, I guess. Again, combating racial hate speech, правоохранительная деятельность, law enforcement or law enforcement activities, judicial protection, education, restoring historical justice, and combating prejudice and intolerance. Or countering. Countering is another, maybe countering, if you want to just don't always be saying combating. Moreover, Russia is also the sponsor, okay, after is usually, you're going to find when it's about a country, it's going to be the sponsor of an annual GA resolution, okay. Вносимое в рамках Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН, I would just say, just skip the вносимое and just say, the annual UN General Assembly resolution. Now, again, the official name of this, so here I wanted to get the main words here. So you'll see here, combating gerizatsiya, glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other. Okay, I'll give you the full. Okay, the full name is actually combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices. И другими видами практики. So again, the видами is more or less skip. Other practices that. So I wanted the specific that contribute to escalate, to fueling, to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. I just wanted the main words. I didn't go for every single word. I thought these were the important ones: the contributing, the fueling, the contemporary. So that's why I just put those ones, and I sort of related intolerance, made up sort of the rest as I went along. В этом документе, easiest way to just start is just to turn the document into the subject of the sentence. That document, inter alia, underlines, stresses the important role and significance of the CERD, Международная конвенция, blah, 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 расовая дискриминация, and your committee. Уважаемые члены комитета, feel free to drop that if you're under pressure. Russia, the Russian Federation, whatever. Russia has developed, so I went for Slajilas, I thought that you'll see here my note, developed as a multi-ethnic state bringing together all ethnic communities. Again, here I put this in English. Within its territory, I thought was the easiest way of putting that, rather than saying something like entering into its composition. That's very wordy. I thought that was the best way of expressing it in English. Again, you're lucky. I was lucky. Obviously, I had the text ahead of time, so I was able to make it as neat as possible. And creating due conditions for their further ethnocultural development. Россия обладает. Now, you'll notice here I put in a note. Okay, Russia boasts. I mean, if you're caught, if you're just doing it simultaneously, you can just say obladad, that just has. But I mean, obladad does have a slightly stronger meaning, doesn't it, than just having. And so it occurred to me, it boasts, okay? Russia boasts unique millennial experience in creating politico-legal conditions for the development and peaceful coexistence of various peoples, various nations. This in particular was noted by Russian President Putin. In his statements, he has repeatedly stressed the importance of, and I've put here, consolidating. I was thinking also you may be a good sort of synonym here, because what are we consolidating? Прочного межнационального мира и согласия. With peace, we can forge peace. I was thinking we can consolidate peace. Прочного межнационального мира. I was thinking of прочного. Usually, I often say in other languages that the best way to go for with peace is like lasting. I think that would work here. I know прочного is more like solid, firm, robust peace, but to me the best, most English sounding thing is the importance of consolidating lasting interethnic peace and harmony in Russia and preventing all forms of discrimination on any grounds. Okay, по любому основанию. That's the kind of thing that is going to come up a lot in these kinds of meetings. Okay, so they're talking about, racism on what grounds. Одним из основных принципов, one of the main principles of state national policy is the principle превозглашен принцип. So here I was just looking now. I mean, you could just say was the principle of preventing and искоренение, eradicating all forms of discrimination on the grounds of social, racial, national, linguistic, or religious принадлежности. Affiliation, I think, here is the best word. Again, this is the kind of word that's going to come up quite a lot, because if you've started in with on the ground, if you've already said on the grounds of social, racial, okay, so the social, racial, these are all adjectives, you're going to need to finish with some kind of a noun at the end of it. And when he says принадлежности, belonging, doesn't sound quite right. Okay, I think in English the safest word to go for is affiliation. Okay, social, racial, affiliation fits with all those kind of things. Membership is another thing that maybe you might think about using, but I don't. Again, I don't. Your social membership, your racial membership doesn't sound quite right to me. Article 19 of the Russian Constitution establishes guarantees of equality of, now this is another expression that is going to come up quite a bit as a package, право и свободы человека и гражданина. I would say human and citizens' rights and freedoms. That's the sort of thing when you sort of hear it, maybe you don't know the first time that they're going to keep using it, but certainly when you hear it the second time, you should make a note of that so that when they keep repeating it, those kinds of set expressions, you can just sort of reel them off. So human and citizens' rights and freedoms, including independently of race, ethnicity, language, origin, place of residence, and religious affiliation. Отношение к религии. I think that again, that's maybe the easiest, or religion. Maybe you just skip the отношение. And it also установлен запрет. So here I actually had to think about this. I mean, if you're going to go word by word, it establishes a prohibition on, okay? But it occurs to me in English, an English speaker would probably say, and it also outlaws. Установлен запрет. I think we would just say it outlaws all forms of restrictions on the rights of citizens on grounds of social, racial, national, ethnic, linguistic, or religious affiliation. This approach is закреплен в стратегии, is enshrined in the strategy of state-national policy. Российская Федерация, again, he says, he's going to, every law, every strategy, he's going to say that it's the Russian Federation. Here you need to use your intuition. Here everyone knows we're talking about the Russian Federation. Okay, the speakers know, the audience knows we're talking about Russia. We know it's not any other country. So you're kind of within your rights, I'd say, just to leave that out as a given. So you might say, so this approach is enshrined in the state-national policy strategy in the period up to 2025, approved through presidential decree of December 2012. And here again, okay, the actual number of the decree, I think, for example, if you didn't have the text in front of you, you could certainly be forgiven for just leaving out the decree number. I think the important thing is, again, the month and the year, December 2012, maybe 19th December 2012, maybe that'd be good. It'd be good to get the actual day. Ее реализация возложена. So its implementation has been mandated to созданный указом президента Российской Федерации. Okay, this is one of these what. So as you can see from my notes here, the way I did it, this is tricky, right? I switched it around. So the way I said it in the meeting was its implementation has been mandated. I said mandated to specialized organ of the state authorities created under a decree of the President of 31st March 2015, number 168. Again, now what would you say if you didn't have the text in front of you? I'm thinking its implementation was mandated to what was created as per a decree of the Russian President of 31st March 2015, namely a specialized organ of state authorities being the Federal Agency on Ethnic Affairs. That would be tricky. If you didn't have the text, that would be very challenging. But again, when you hear на созданный указом, you can tell it's going to become one of these compound expressions. So you throw in the what, that tends to be the easiest solution to what was created by the decree of the president. К основным функциям my always initial, when I hear k at the start of a sentence, I tend to just drop it and turn whatever the noun is into the subject of the sentence. The main functions of the agency include, inter alia, preventing all forms of discrimination on grounds of racial, national, or racial, ethnic, religious, or linguistic affiliation, and also preventing attempts to fuel, разжигание, to incite, to fuel racial, ethnic, or religious. So I put here strife. I thought for rozen, I thought that was a good word for rozen. Division. I just thought I'd look rozen up on multi-tran. Also, the first word it gives is discord. Racial, ethnic, religious discord. Oh, that might be quite nice. It also gives strife as well. Hatred, либо вражды, enmity. Yeah, enmity is what I usually go for with vражда. Antagonism. Well, that might be quite nice as well. Hatred, antagonism, enmity. Yeah, I think, well, any of those. Разработана, the easiest thing to do here is just to we it, okay? We have developed a relevant state program, implementation of a state national policy, which предусматривает, my go-to is always when I hear предусматривает, when it talks about strategy or a law, which provides for a list of measures направленных, aimed at, geared towards, inter alia, guaranteeing equality of human and citizens' rights and freedoms. Here we go again. Человека и граждан. That's number 2. That's the second time they've used that, right? Regardless of race, ethnicity, language, and religious affiliation, as well as the funding thereof. Takje said, and relevant funding thereof. You'll see, I decided I wanted just to have that down in English so that I could just read it off when I came to it. I think that's the most straightforward way, again, of encapsulating that. А также соответствующий объем их финансирования, whatever, or relevant and funding thereof. Законодательством установлено, I would just again make this the subject of the sentence. The legislation has established Полномочия, the powers, and purview again. I've gone sfera competenza. I think that, yeah, purview of the competent authorities. So yeah, I wanted all this written down. So that's why I noted it like that. Of the competent authorities, subjektów Rosyjskiej Federacji. I tend to talk about these as being the entities of the Russian Federation, local self-government bodies, and должностных лиц. You see, I went for mandate holders. Often maybe I'll say officials. Maybe I looked that up. Maybe I decided. I think maybe at the time I decided to just look up the dictionary, see what they actually gave for должностные лица. So mandate holders might be quite good. I quite like that. In the sphere of inter-ethnic relations. At the level of the entities, определение, we have defined. Yeah, I guess when you hear определение, your first initial reaction is to say define, right? We have determined, we have defined. It seems a bit strange. We have defined the deputy heads of region responsible for the state of inter-ethnic relations. Do we define them? We have appointed, have assigned. At the level of the entities, we have assigned deputy heads of region responsible for the state of inter-ethnic relations. Russian national legislation is built on the sectoral principle, отраслевый принцип. I think the easiest thing is sectoral principle. In other words, the whole body, I've put here for massive, body of normative legal acts are divided into separate sectors, which include, включают в себя, all norms regulating specific spheres of однородных общественных отношений. Yeah, this is what I was talking about, you know. This is so clunky. Defining the sphere of homogeneous social relations, and I've put a note, the note I made here of methods inherent thereto. Yeah, that's a horrible sentence, isn't it? Russian national legislation is built on the sectoral principle. In other words, the whole body of normative legal acts is divided into separate sectors, which include all norms regulating a specific sphere of uniform or homogeneous social relations inherent to their methods. Yeah, the problem I had was I can't really understand who the характерными. Why is that instrumental? Is there a word missing there? So anyway, when you have a sort of doubt like that, just play it safe. Just say something sort of neutral, and the methods inherent there too. Anti-discrimination principles and norms, or standards if you prefer, of a general nature, запрещающие, outlawing discrimination on the grounds of racial, ethnic, social, linguistic, or конфессиональной принадлежности. I can say I'm all right with confessional. Okay, maybe you just want to say religious affiliation. I know, for example, that I've discussed this with members of the Arabic booth. Obviously, confessional religious issues in the Middle East are something of a hot topic, shall we say, and often they will talk, the Lebanese, my Lebanese colleagues will say, we say in English, confessional. So I think I'm all right also with using linguistic or confessional, linguist or religious affiliation concerning human rights in a specific field, in implementation or in exercise of labor rights, okay, right to education, because you exercise rights, okay, use of mother tongue, родным языком, mother tongue, the right to enjoy the benefits of cultural achievements. Yeah, this was a horrible paragraph, so that's why I've got quite a few notes here. Thanks to this approach, the principle of non-discrimination распространяется на все, extends or applies to all rights recognized under the Constitution and Russian legislation. This normative legal base is in a state of ongoing development, is being permanently fine-tuned in light of contemporary realities and in strict compliance with the provisions of the CERD, which allows us to avoid arbitrary interpretation of its norms. In line with federal law of 25th July 2002, again, if you didn't have the text, you could just drop this serial number. Combating extremist activities. So, in line with federal law of July 2002 on combating extremist activities, возбуждение, inciting or fueling social, racial, ethnic or religious strife, propaganda of exclusivity, превосходство, supremacy, or inferiority against a person on the grounds of his social, racial, national, national or ethnic, I think you can say either, really, religious and linguistic affiliation or religious affiliation, propaganda or public demonstrations of Nazi or similar attributes or symbolism, public calls to carry out these activities, mass preparation and spread of materials of such content, the organization and preparation of such actions, as well as the funding and incitement. That's the best for Badsedkatis, so that's my sort of go-to, incitement, to their implementation, fall under the definition of extremist activities и преследуются согласно and can be prosecuted under the relevant criminal law. This is very, very clunky and difficult, and yeah, it's very hard to do without text, isn't it? Very long sentences. So they all fall, they are all punishable. They are all liable for prosecution under the relevant criminal law, уголовного законодательства. A number of articles of the Russian Criminal Code provide for criminal уголовная ответственность. Criminal liability is probably the best. Liability probably better than responsibility. For совершение, perpetration, for the commission, you can say, of crimes of an extremist nature, articles 282 to 282.3. More than 10, okay, I put here clusters, more than 10 clusters of crimes include the motives of political, ideological, racial, ethnic, or religious hatred or enmity, against any social group as a qualifying factor, significantly aggravating liability for perpetration and carrying tougher sanctions. Horrible set of paragraphs, this. Aggravating factor as opposed to a mitigating factor. You want to remember those two as kind of two antonyms that are very useful in this kind of context. In accordance with Article 13 of the Constitution, just do without Российской Федерации, there is prohibition of activities by social associations, the goals and actions of which are aimed towards fueling, for the sake of convenience during this text, we'll say разжигание, fueling, подстрекательство, inciting, fueling social, racial, ethnic, and religious strife, ongoing control, monitoring of the activities of various kinds of social associations, including when it comes to their carrying out unlawful activities, противоправной деятельности, unlawful activities, is carried out by the Ministry of Justice. And again, I would probably just drop I don't need to say the Russian Ministry of Justice. As part of organizing systemic combating of extremist manifestations geared towards fueling social, racial, ethnic, and religious strife, we have adopted a strategy for combating extremism up to 2025. Again, we know it's going to be in the Russian Federation, approved by presidential decree of May 2020. If I didn't have the text, that's how I would be doing it. Russia is implementing a consistent policy aimed at combating attempts to героизации нацизма. So this is taken from that resolution, right? Glorifying Nazism. We don't talk about heroic, there's no such verb, is there? Glorification, anyway. That's what attempts to glorify Nazism, propagating Nazi ideology and other ideas and theories of supremacy on the basis of race, ethnic, religious, or social origin or that seek to оправдать, condone, or encourage racial hatred and discrimination in any form, and subsequently take measures to eradicate all incitement to such discrimination. In particular, legislation prohibits the publication of the works of the heads of the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, the Fascist Party of Italy, and publications based or condoning, justifying, okay, those are two good words like we had up here, right? What was the word here they had? Пытающий оправдать расовую ненависть, so condoning, okay? So condoning the practice of the perpetration of war and other crimes geared towards the full or partial destruction of any ethnic, social, racial, national, or religious group, the use of Nazi symbolism or symbolism of organizations that, so here I've put collaborated with the Nazis. That's a good word. Whenever they talk about World War II, whoever it may have been, which groups worked with the Nazis, that's kind of the best word, I think. Collaborated with the Nazis, as well as insulting the memory of the victims of the Великой Отечественной войны, the Great Patriotic War. You probably want to call it, you could say maybe World War II, but the Russians, that's what they call World War II, isn't it? The Great Patriotic War. So I think I think that name carries particular meaning for them. So you probably want to call it, when you hear Великая Отечественная война, you probably do want to call it the Great Patriotic War. Russia has established criminal liability for rehabilitation of Nazism. Yeah, I was just looking at оскорблять память. So yeah, insults the memory, besmirches the memory. The Russian authorities уделяют серьезное внимание. I was thinking here, maybe the word prioritize could work just to to capture all those three words. The Russian authorities prioritize investigating and prosecuting виновных perpetrators in cases of inciting hatred or enmity on racial, ethnic, and religious grounds. Law enforcement personnel on a regular basis undergo professional training. That's a good verb to have, a good collocation. Undergo professional training on issues of combating racial discrimination and profiling. Результаты проверок исполнения. So the results of monitoring of implementation of legislation on combating extremism свидетельствует о том, just shows that work by the law enforcement authorities. Sometimes you can just say work by law enforcement. I think in English we can just say work by law enforcement on identifying and пресечением, maybe say suppressing acts of extremism have become наступательней. I've said become proactive and have started to yield more palpable, more tangible results. That's a good verb to have, приносит результаты, yield. In particular, the increase in the number of crimes identified of an extremist nature in the entities significantly has to a significant extent been a result of the active activities of centers on combating extremism within the interior departments, the departments of the interior, within the departments of internal affairs. So here I put этому в многом способствовали меры. This in large part, I was trying to work out what I wrote here. I said, okay, this in large part was the fruit of measures of a general nature taken by the Russian Supreme Court in upholding or complying with the main provisions of the convention. Again, a more simple way of doing it would, perhaps again, if I didn't have time to think of fruit, this in large part was helped by, or способствовать. With способствовать, I tend to contribute, okay? Содействовать, facilitate, способствовать, contribute. The problem is turning contribute into A passive doesn't work very well. This in large part was contributed by. That sounds very awkward. So that's why I say, this in large part was helped by, or was the fruit of measures of a general nature. Now, this is again a very clunky sentence at the start of this next paragraph. До сведения судей работников аппарата Верховного Суда. Let's see if I can decipher what I wrote here. Okay, so I think because I had time to prepare, I said that, judges and personnel within the Supreme Court are permanently kept abreast of ongoing practice of the Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Okay, so I've put here, до сведения, keeping abreast. Very nice, eh? That's how I done it. Now, what if I hadn't had the text here? I think your best bet, when you hear like до сведения somebody, the best thing to do is just immediately think, are informed of. So you would say something like, you hear what the noun is, you hear the subject of the sentence, which is the судьи работников. So the judges and personnel of the Supreme Court are kept informed, постоянно, on an ongoing basis, of information on ongoing practice within the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I think that's it's tricky when you have that opening to a sentence, до сведения судей работников. So I think you want to really wait for the whole pack. Don't immediately start with до сведения, wait to see, you'll immediately hear who is being до сведения. The judges and the Supreme Court personnel are informed. That is probably the most straightforward way of doing it. Again, you can be kept abreast as well. Again, that's... I think, as I say, if I didn't have a text, I'd be keeping it very simple, and I would be leaving any abreasts for another time. But I think that's the best way of doing it. The Supreme Court posts in Russian language, in electronic format, on its intranet, ведомственная сеть, I presume that's the intranet of the Supreme Court, decisions of the committee adopted pursuant to consideration of individual communications, индивидуальных сообщений. So this is a mechanism actually within these treaty bodies, okay, that they have, individual communications. So that's what they're called. That's just a set name for them. As well as on the committee's general recommendations. Again, general recommendation, again, under the set term within the treaty bodies. This information is available to, so I did some looking up for you here of certain terminology. Судов общей юрисдикции, включая мировых судей. So I didn't actually, when I did it in real time, I just said courts of a general jurisdiction. But then I looked up then I looked up yesterday. So here Multitran gave me regular courts or first instance courts. So I guess you could call them that as well. I think what I said originally, courts of a general jurisdiction would be fine. Including, this is мировых судей. I didn't know this. I had to look this up at the time. Justices of the peace. So that's an important thing that may come up again in other contexts, including justices of the peace. So here we go. До сведения судей работников аппарата. Again, the same construction, it's almost the same words. So judges and Supreme Court personnel are kept informed of information contained in the annual reports of the committee. That's how I would do it if I had to. The texts of the annual reports in Russian are also posted on the Supreme Court intranet. Decisions by the committee, translated into Russian, are also included in the periodical reviews of practice by the Supreme Court. Notice I'm just dropping Российская Федерация every time, okay? When you've got this such convoluted vocabulary, you really have to try and make your life easier. В Российской Федерации выстроена, I'd probably say, I'd probably turn the Russia just into the subject. Russia has established a system of effective judicial protection for all persons in the event of any acts of discriminatory violations of their rights. Russian judges in their activities consistently implement the principle of the unswerving, the unwavering protection of rights and lawful interests of persons under the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation, regardless of race, skin color, birth, national or ethnic affiliation, including by using direct references to the relevant articles of the CERD. Watson все больше распространение получает. Again, tricky how to approach this. I would probably throw in the what. What's becoming increasingly widespread is, okay, crimes of an extremist nature, подготовленный, planned, prepared. I mean, if a подготовленный, I mean, you hear готовить, and then your initial reaction, I think, is to go with prepared, but I think you can say planned as well. Hatched. What about hatched? You hatched plans. Hatched or committed on the internet. I think that's a very high. But then there's a high register, but it's a very impressive word, shall we say, when talking about hatching some kind of dastardly plan. Российские компетентные органы, just the Russian authorities conduct work to identify, sometimes I say pinpoint for vyjavit, just for a bit of a change, and block information that contains calls to carry out activities aimed at fueling racial, national, religious enmity, propagating ideas of exclusivity or inferiority against someone on any grounds. The competent body in such issues is the Federal Service on Supervision of Communications, Information Technology, and Mass Media, which, within its purview, в пределах своих компетенций, implements preventive measures, prophylactические меры. They often talk about this. The Russians write preventive measures to предупреждение подобной деятельности, to clamp down on such activities. I think I just put that in just to have something different from always combating, countering, okay? Again, I thought I'd look this up for you, okay? So the actual name of that agency, it's the Federal Service for Supervision, so that when you hear Nadzor, supervision of communications, information technology, and mass media. So the Russian name for that is Roskomnadzor. Okay, so they're like the watchdog. That's a good word, by the way, the watchdog. But yeah, when you hear Nadzor, so it seems to be that the Russian government, they like to use supervision. Okay, in order to identify information material, of an extremist nature, so признаками экстремизма of an extremist nature. Monitoring of the media and the internet on a permanent basis. Проводит is, just turn that, of course, into a passive, is conducted by the prosecutorial bodies of the Russian entities when identifying violations. Inspections are organized, pursuant to which measures of a prosecutorial response are taken. Oh God, so convoluted this. So I looked this up as well. Проверочные мероприятия. I think I looked that up yesterday. Okay, that seems to be the first go-to solution. Inspection. So inspections are carried out in line with the provisions of the strategy for state national policy. Russia implements monitoring of the state of interethnic and interconfessional relations, and also early warning of conflict situations. This information should contribute to the adoption of effective decisions on implementing state policy in this sphere. Special attention is given to preventing manifestations of all forms of discrimination, racism, and xenophobia against sportsmen, athletes, perhaps, I think is perhaps the better word here, against athletes and other sporting entities, subjective sporta, sporting subjects, I think just entities, to keep it safe. В российские спортивные организации, so Russian sporting organizations, federations, leagues, and clubs, contain structural divisions responsible for взаимодействие с болельщиками. I think an English bureaucrat would probably say responsible for liaison with fans and for combating discrimination in sport. For example, the Russian Football Union has the position of inspector on combating racism and discrimination in football. Soccer for you Americans, right? Like the round ball, not that weird shaped one. But we're forced to note that today Russian sport is facing unprecedented discrimination from international sporting structures and organizations on the ethnic principle. We have regularly faced numerous cases of the exclusion, of the expulsion of Russian sporting organizations from the corresponding international federations, and bans under contrived pretexts from international competitions of Russian athletes, and bans on hosting such competitions in the territory of Russia. Okay, so he's referring to all the sanctions that have been introduced since the start of the war in Ukraine. The Russian authorities implement measures to combat prejudice that leads to racial discrimination, and to encourage mutual understanding, or to foster, to promote. Those are good synonyms, right? Promote, encourage, foster. Mutual understanding, tolerance, and friendship between nations and ethnic and religious groups, in close cooperation with the representatives of national diasporas, ethno-cultural, social, youth, and religious organizations. We have created and are effectively implementing mechanisms for preventing and settling inter-ethnic and inter-confessional conflicts. Российская Федерация всячески поощряет. Russia fully encourages в надлежащих случаях, where appropriate. I thought I put that, that was one of my notes at the time. I thought I think that's a good sort of expression, where appropriate. Unifying multi-ethnic organizations and movements, as well as other events, as well as other measures aimed at destroying racial and inter-ethnic barriers. Such measures are implemented via various ministries and departments. The state provides financial support to the activities of national cultural autonomies. I mean, I did look that up. It's weird to use it as autonomy. I mean, usually in English, autonomy is an uncountable noun, right? You have autonomy, but here in the Russian, it comes across as being a countable noun. An autonomy. But I think it's okay. National ethnic cultural autonomies and ethnic cultural centers. For example, there is the organization of folklore and ethnic music concerts, master classes народного творчества. So I had to look this up. And so the best solution I found was arts and crafts, master classes in arts and crafts. So you do get this in these treaty bodies. They'll talk about all these delegations from all these countries will talk about how they're trying to sort of foster inter-ethnic harmony, and one of the ways of doing this is organizing, folklore and these kinds of events. So you'll hear about various little clubs that have been set up for sewing. I remember I think in that Kazakhstan one that I left that I mentioned earlier, that I referred you to. They talk about how there's like a club for sewing, women sewing clubs. That's the kind of that's the kind of little vocabulary niche that we're entering here. Okay, anyway, this is arts and crafts, events of a scientific, исследовательского и диалогового формата, I would probably say of an in scientific and dialogue format, projects to maintain and develop the traditional cultures of the peoples of Russia, peoples or nations. Russia, на постоянной основе, on a permanent basis, is adopting relevant measures to teach, educate, relevant measures in the sphere of education, teaching, culture, and information, including at a regional level, within all state and municipal общеобразовательных организаций, so secondary educational organizations, I guess. You could just say general educational organizations. I think that secondary is good. The comprehensive education organizations. В учебную программу, so the curricula for primary and middle school or secondary school include special courses aimed at формирование у подрастающих поколений. Okay, so I put here instilling, imbuing. So I think I like instilling in the young generation a culture of mutual respect and a patriotic worldview, promoting traditional cultures. Propaganda, I think, propagandizing that's always carries a rather negative connotation. So this is obviously meant to be in a positive light. So I would talk about promoting traditional cultures, religious and moral values, as well as ознакомление с культурой. So I wrote in here at the time, acquainting them with the cultural and religious traditions of the nations of Russia, and lessons in commemoration of the Holocaust are given. Уделяется большое внимание. Again, a quick solution here is a top priority is preventing the spread of radicalism among youth, молодежной среде, so among youth. To that end, the authorities have bolstered their interaction with educational organizations in higher education, with volunteer and social organizations that conduct such work with youth. The activities of educational organizations, of higher educational organizations, on implementing cultural, educational, and teaching measures is coordinated by, again, turn that into the passive, by the Education Ministry, by the Education and Science Ministry. Yeah, you get a lot of these words. Просветительских, воспитательных, so you'd be forgiven maybe for dropping. You just say for conducting cultural and educational measures is coordinated. Okay, вузах. So in вузах, just college, I think is the easiest thing to go for. In colleges, there's been the creation of centers for harmonization of interethnic and international, межэтнических, межнациональных. So this is throughout most of this text, межнациональное has been talking about ethnic, so interethnic, international relations, clubs on interethnic friendship, and schools of youth tolerance. Реализуется программы. We've been implementing programs for adaptation for foreign students for Российской Федерации. So Russia, when you hear that expression, for Российская Федерация проживает, the most straightforward solution is Russia is home to over 190 nations and ethnic groups who, in line with the constitution and legislation, have equal rights to maintain and develop their language, culture, and traditions. At the same time, the state provides additional support measures to, коренным малочисленным народам Севера Сибири, Дальнего Востока. This is the important thing that often the Russians will refer to. It's these indigenous peoples in these regions, and that's their official name, right? Коренным малочисленным народы. So I've done the hard work for you here again, and so the actual in English, the equivalent that the Russian government uses is the numerically small indigenous peoples of the North Siberia and Far East. And they keep, whenever they talk about those indigenous peoples, they always tend to give the full name of them. So that's actually, the numerically small indigenous peoples. Now, up to now in my 13 years, I've just tended to just do away with the numerically small. I mean, indigenous peoples by their nature tend to be numerically small in whichever country they happen to be in. But it's good to know the official name, okay, numerically small. This includes peoples whose number is less than 50,000 people, the indigenous peoples of the North, as well as other ethnic minorities. Given the vulnerability of the way of life and of their native lands, sedi abitania, I mean, again, I looked this up. I mean, that usually refers to animals, right? The habitat. But I don't think we talk about habitats when it comes to people. Or if we do, it tends to be in a sort of sarcastic, sort of literally way. You know, taking the football hooligan out of his natural habitat of the pub. But anyway, this is not really meant to be sarcastic or ironic, is it? So I think that's why I'd say their way of life and their native lands. There's the small number of each of these indigenous peoples. I wouldn't again start getting here of these of the small number of each of these numerically small indigenous people. The Russian Constitution and federal legislation provides for a significant list of preferences and exemptions. Yeah, so you want a couple of words here, don't you, that get across out of privileges. I mean, you're talking about tax breaks when it comes to ligot. I guess here maybe just, preferences and exemptions for the indigenous peoples of the North Siberian Far East concerning the use of natural resources and lands and measures of social support. Moreover, in the 28 entities whose territory is home to the indigenous peoples of the North Siberia and the Far East. So again, here, Kaiman, that's the acronym that the Russians have heard it, perhaps. Well, I guess maybe, if you have a speaker and they keep referring to them, they might at some point break into the KMNS, and I think that's why I did that little bit of underlining, just to make sure that KMNS was indeed the acronym for the numerically small people of the indigenous peoples of the North, blah, blah, blah. And to save yourself, if you're interpreting this, I would, rather than always saying the North, Siberia, the Far East, I'd be sort of saying whose territory is home to the aforesaid peoples. I would be using, these little devices, these or the aforesaid, so that you don't have to give the full list of all the territories. We have adopted more than 450 regional normative legal acts geared towards the social and economic development of representatives of these peoples. The 3-year period between 2020 and 2023, after submission of the combined 25th and 26th periodic report to the Russian Federation, okay, that's just reference to this report that they've just submitted ahead of this meeting, at a federal level, in the sphere of protecting the rights and lawful interests of representatives of indigenous peoples, we have adopted 13 normative legal acts. This kind of legislative work aimed at strengthening protections of the rights of indigenous peoples is ongoing. Продолжается в настоящее время, just is ongoing. Top priority for Russia is improving the status of Tsigan, Roma. Okay, this is always a bit of a delicate issue, how to best render Tsigan. You don't want to say gypsies. I don't think that sounds right in English. I think the safest word to go for is Roma. Okay, even though I know that like the Tsigan, right? I think that's what they call themselves, Tsigan. I know here in Serbia, right, where I am now, they're called Tsigani, and that they call themselves Tsigani. But for this kind of thing, just play safe, call them Roma, and their integration into modern societal life. The president of the Federal National Cultural Autonomy of Roma, Mr. Dimiter, is a member of Hadith Sastav, is a member of the council under the Russian president on interethnic relations and of the advisory council on ethnic cultural affairs within that autonomy. So this is tricky because that FADN, sorry, the FADN is the Federal Agency on Ethnic Affairs. So that's the kind of thing that would throw you right. You know, they haven't spoken about that agency in a few pages, and if they were to suddenly throw in that acronym, my God, that could really throw you off course. Of that, yeah. Together with the so again, this is now referring back to the cultural autonomy. Together with the Roma autonomy, we have developed, with the approval of the Russian government, a comprehensive plan of measures for the social, economic, and ethno-cultural development of Roma. We have organized quarterly monitoring of the status of Roma in the entities of the Federation and implementation of the methodological recommendations for the executive authorities within the entities and the local self-government authorities on work with the Roma population. The vast majority, I guess, of high number of Roma, I guess the majority of Roma lead a sedentary way of life, sedentary, are integrated into the economic, social, and cultural sphere of societal life. They work in various sectors of agriculture, production, service industry, in education institutions, and culture. However, Roma, nomadic Roma, Wiejskie Kaciewoja, always have those two as antonyms, okay, sedentary and nomadic, because in many countries that is a source of actual conflict between, I know in Sudan, Darfur, there's the conflict between basically those who are sedentary, who are in the cities perhaps, who for their livelihoods stay where they are, maybe have their own farms, and the nomads who basically follow, who have their herds and go wherever their herds need to go to graze. So there's a good two concepts to have in mind together: sedentary versus and nomadic. So Roma who lead a nomadic way of life require support measures primarily when it comes to their children getting an education. In particular, to adapt Roma children and for them to complete освоение учебной программы. So I sat around for a few minutes yesterday thinking, what's the collocation with a curriculum? Just doing a curriculum. We don't really hear it, we do it. I think the best, if you're going to have a verb to collocate with a curriculum, for them to complete the curricula at the level of their peers, sверстников, where appropriate, в случае необходимости, where appropriate. There's the creation of special preparatory classes, after which children are integrated into regular classes without psychological or other problems. I guess вливаются are filtered into regular classes, but again, just integrated, I think, just is sufficient. Russia, based on its historical experience, its constitution, normative legal acts, principles of state national policy, and proceeding from the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of the UN Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the current convention, consistently implements a policy of supporting robust inter-ethnic, or again, lasting inter-ethnic peace and harmony, and preventing all forms of discrimination, and will implement this policy in future. Distinguished committee members, in conclusion, let me say that Russian national legislation and law enforcement practice, when it comes to combating discrimination, has many different aspects, all of which I cannot cover in such a short time. Therefore, during the meeting today and tomorrow, me and my colleagues will be pleased to provide you with any more detailed information on those issues of interest to the committee experts. I thank you, And that's when the real fun begins. Then comes the rapporteur, who will then sort of more or less set out a laundry list of all the criticisms of the state with lots of questions, and then it'll go back and forth. You'll have the delegations, you'll have the chief inspectors who have been brought along from the various CISOs, the various police stations, who will then speak, and they will reel off all these statistics, and they'll reel off all these plans and strategies, and how successful they've all been implemented. This is all delegation. This isn't just Russia. This is just how these meetings go, and yeah, it's a hell of a 3 hours or 6 hours, because I say they all meet over 2 days. Guys, I hope you've learned some new stuff there. I hope that has maybe helped. These are really good statements to do if you have the statement. You can listen to the original and then tally it with the statement. You learn a lot of the sort of in-house parlance used by officials within government ministries and so forth. What are the three things I'd maybe highlight from this statement? One thing I'd perhaps highlight here: установлен запрет. I mean, as I say, establishes a prohibition. I like that I can just synthesize that into outlaws. Outlaws all forms of discrimination. Second thing is just you've got to remember just to edit out. Try and streamline. Get rid of all these. Use your intuition. You don't need to keep saying the Российская Федерация. You don't need to keep saying the Russian Federation. The meeting is about Russia, about what Russia has done. It goes without saying that everything that these ministers talk about is going to be about what Russia has done. Подстрекать, okay, these are good set of synonyms to remember. Fueling, incitement to, fanning the flames of racial hatred, whatever. Оправдать, okay, I think this is a good word to know. Often the first thing that'll come to mind will just be justify, at least with me, justify. But often it's often also used as condone as well, condoning acts of hatred, whatever. Das сведение, okay, this is one of the hardest things in that whole text, I think. How to render that when it's the first thing you hear in a sentence. And just think, are kept informed of, or kept abreast, if you prefer. Подготовленные, plans, okay, prepared, planned, hatched. Remember, just make sure you're comfortable with turning actives into passives going from Russian, okay? To accommodate, when the subject of the sentence comes at the end, like here, координирует. Министерство образования is coordinated by the Education Ministry. And there's something else with проводит, wherever it was another ministry, just turn it into is implemented by. You've got to, when you're interpreting from Russian and doing this, you have to be comfortable doing that. Предусматривать закон, provide for, okay, that's my, 9 times out of 10 I'll go for that. Well, and you numerically, so just remember that just as a name, it might help you out, at some point. The numerically small, what do we call them? The numerically small indigenous peoples, okay? It's always just good to have, at least in the back of your mind, what the official name for them is, even though you'll probably just want to just call them indigenous peoples, but, Okay, that was more than 3 things that stood out from that statement, but never mind. Hopefully one of those ideas might sink in. Please do tell me in the comments if you've learned anything new, if there's any contributions you yourself can make, if there's anything that I've overlooked, any, bits of inspiration that you yourself may have for some of the problems that we run into this text. Like, share, subscribe, keep watching the Interpretation Station. All that remains to be said is that episode 185 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.